We now know almost all of the techniques that we'll need to factor any polynomial. Most of the polynomials that we can't factor with the techniques we have so far will be prime. So, if we meet a polynomial in the wild, how do we approach it? Our first step is always to factor out the GCF. Sometimes that turns out to be 1, and there's no work to do at that step, but we always have to start there. Our next step depends on the number of terms. 1 term, it's a monomial. Monomials are automatically factored. 2 terms, we only have the tools to factor a binomial if it's a special form. So for degree 2 or 3, if it's not one of our 3 special forms, it's prime and we can stop. For degree 4 or more, we may need extra special forms. So we'll try to factor using these guys, but if those don't work, we can't conclude that it's prime. We may need to appeal to our advanced polynomial techniques, which we'll learn later in the course. So that's 2 terms. Factor it if it's a special form. Otherwise, at this point, we're done with it. 3 terms. If it's quadratic, use the AC method. If we have a quadratic trinomial and the AC method fails, that was prime. If we have a trinomial of higher degree, we try to pretend that it's quadratic. And when we pretend that it's quadratic, we're going to use the AC method again. If that doesn't work, we can't conclude that it's prime. We may need to turn again to advanced techniques. So quadratic is prime if the AC fails. Higher degree may or may not be prime. What about 4 terms? If we have 4 terms, we'll start by trying grouping. If it fails and our polynomial is quadratic, we can't factor it as a product of binomials at least. If grouping fails, we'll try the difference of squares technique. If it's high degree and both of those fail, we'll turn again to our advanced techniques. If we have something with 5 or more terms, we'll turn to advanced techniques as well. So the tools that we have let us do anything with 2 terms, anything with 3 terms, anything with 4 terms, as long as it's not too messy. And that actually turns out to be most polynomials, actually. When the polynomials get really ugly, we are going to need a few more techniques, but the tools we have right now are enough to factor most polynomials. From now until when we learn those advanced techniques, we'll only see polynomials that can be factored fully using these steps. Now, of course, after we use any of these steps, 2-term, 3-term, or 4-term steps, we need to loop back to step 2. And for each factor we found, say, how many terms does this factor have? Let's factor further. Right, so we need to get to the point where we know that all of our factors are prime. And of course, every time we factor, the degree gets smaller and smaller. Eventually, we'll end up with linear stuff or with quadratic stuff that we know is prime.